Hello and welcome to my channel Edu at PsyClinic. And with you, I am Dr. Nelson. You can also visit www.psyclinic.co.in for more resources and information. Here we are going to discuss on sampling and sampling techniques. The objectives of today's lecture are we define what a population is, and also we'll define what a sample is, and then we'll go through the different types of sampling techniques. First of all, we should know what is a population and what is sample, and the difference between the population and the sample. Population means all members that meet a set of specifications or a specified criteria. When we are doing a research, we need to do the research on a particular population. So that group we call as the population. For example, the higher secondary students of Kerala state, that maybe we are selecting as a population for our study. But we can't include every subject, every member of that population into our research. If we are taking every member of that particular population, we call it census. We don't use a census method because we can't collect the data from each and every member of the population. So we are selecting a few members from that particular population for our study, and that selected group we call as a sample. When only some elements are selected from a population, we refer to that as a sample. It is critical, and an error at this stage will destroy the integrity of the research. It should truly represent the population. That's the most important phrase. It should truly represent the population. The sample should be a true representation of the population. Only then we can generalize our findings to the whole population. So when you are doing a research among the higher secondary students of Kerala state, that may be run into some lags, and we can't collect the data from each student, from each sample, from every student, from every subject. So we select a few of them. But while selecting, the selection should be a true representation of the population. So we need to take care how it should truly represent. Those are the ways we need to know, and for that we use particular type of sampling techniques. And now we will move on to the different types of sampling techniques, and we'll see what sampling is. Sampling is a process used in statistical analysis in which a predetermined number of observations are taken from a larger population. The methodology used to sample from a larger population depends on the type of analysis being performed, but it may include simple random sampling or systematic sampling or random sampling and non-random sampling. Different types of sampling techniques are used. Here we use a predetermined number of observation. So we will for example, if we are taking the whole population of higher secondary students of Kerala state, and we decide that we need to take some 500 out of that. So we are selecting a predetermined number from the whole population, and that selection we call as a sampling. And we know that the research can be classified into two types. One is the quantitative research and the qualitative research. And in quantitative research, we use mostly the probability sampling techniques. In quantitative research, we can use both probability sampling and non-probability sampling, but mostly we use the probability sampling technique. We'll see what the probability sampling and non-probability sampling, we'll see it later. But in quantitative research, both types of sampling techniques are used. Whereas in qualitative research, we use mostly non-probability sampling techniques. And we'll see what is probability sampling. In probability sampling, every member of the target population has a non-chance of being included in the sample. If the researcher is interested in generalizing the findings derived from the sample to the general population, then probability sampling is far more better and accurate. So in probability sampling, every member of the population will get a chance to be included in the sample. If there are some 1,000 students in the school, and you want to do the research on the 1,000 students, and then every member may get a chance to be included in the sample. So this type of sampling techniques, we call it the probability sampling. And there are different types of probability sampling, and now we'll see different types of probability sampling techniques. One is the simple random sampling, then the systematic sampling, stratified random sampling, and cluster sampling. These are the commonly used probability sampling techniques for research, and we will see each one of them. We will see what simple random sampling is. It is the easiest form of probability sampling. Either a lottery method or using a computer, it can be done. Giving a number to each member of the population and then selecting every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. So you think if you are going to a particular school, and you want to do the research on the student on the high school students, and in that particular school there may be some 1,000 students. Then we want to select 100 students out of them. So what we do is we give the numbers from 1 to 1000, we give to the whole students, and from that, from the 1 to 1000, we are selecting some numbers using the lottery method. We select 100 of them using the lottery method or using a computer. The random numbers will be selected either using a lottery method or using a computer or in some other way. The selection will be done on a random basis so that every member may get a chance to be included in the sample. So here the advantage is that it is easy, fair and representative. There is no subjective bias. The researcher he can't decide whether that particular person should be included or not. The researcher could not decide on that. It is all based on this random basis. But the disadvantage is that the list of population should be complete and up to date. May not be practical for a very large population. You think the list of students, here in this case, if there are 1,000 students, the list should be up to date so that every member should get a chance. No student should get left out from the random selection procedure. Every student should get the chance. So the list should be clear and up to date. And also the problem is that every member of the population should be assigned a number. Only then we can use this type of random sampling techniques. So if we can do that for very large population, we may find it little difficult, but it is a sort of probability sampling that is widely used for research. And then we go to the systematic sampling. We'll see what systematic sampling is. It involves selection of every n subject in the population to be in the sample. Here there is not much difference between the systematic sampling and the random sampling. In random sampling, what we are doing is we select the students, the sample in random. We use a lottery method or like that. But here what we are doing is we don't use the lottery method. We give numbers for every members in the population, and then what we are going to do is we select every n. For example, if you had a population of 500 students and you want to select 50 students as a sample, then we select every 10th member. So if you select every 10th member, we will get 50 students. We can start a random starting point on the list. So what we are doing is, if there are 500 students, we give a number for every member, for every student, and then we will see, okay, we will start from the every fifth. means we'll get that every 10th we'll select a student from every 10th, and the starting point we will not start from the number 1, first number 1, then number 11, not like that. We may be taking first we may take number 2, then the next 10, 12. Then in such a way we can do that. So what we are doing is we select every nth subject in the population. Instead of taking the random, we select the nth, and the starting point need to be finalized. We can't do the starting point, we can't select the starting point according to the will of the researcher. It is not done that. Then it becomes a non-probability sampling. It should be a probability sampling in every manner. So what we are doing is we can start a random starting point on the list. The starting point in this case will be a number between 1 and 10. To select the starting number, random selection will be used. So random we will use for what? To select the starting point. Because from 1 to 10 we may not start with 1. We'll take a lot from 1 to 10. So if it is the 4th student, means first we'll take the 4th, then the next after 10, that means the 14th, like that it goes on. So 10, if you are want to select the students like that, first we'll take the 4th, then the 14th, then the 24th, 34th, like that. So 1 to 10, we select a number from 1 to 10 using the random sampling technique, or for that we can use a lottery method. So lottery method, if you are getting the number 6, means we take the number 6, then 16, then 26, like that. So here also we should give a number for every member of the population. For every member of the population, a number should be given. So it is also another version of the random sampling. Then we'll see the next thought, that is a stratified random sampling. It involves the division of population into smaller subgroups known as strata. The strata are formed based on members' shared attributes or characteristics such as type of family, family income, etc. It is also known as proportional random sampling or quota random sampling. Population is divided into homogeneous groups. Sample size from each strata should be proportional to the population. So here what the researcher is doing is, the researcher will divide the whole population into smaller subgroups. If you think the whole population is, if it is not homogeneous, we use this technique mostly when the population is not homogeneous. You think you want to study, you are going to a school. Again, I take the example as a school. We are going to a school and we are doing the research, and we want to study about the parenting styles. And you think in that particular school we are going to study the parenting styles among the primary school children. Then what you are doing is, we go to the school and then we find that in that particular school there are students from different states. There are maybe some 3 or 4 states the students are studying, who the students may be belonging to different states, that their native place is different, and the researcher thinks that the parenting styles may differ according to their native state. So the researcher finds that the population is not homogeneous, because it may contain students from different states, and he sorts out and he finds that there are students from 4 states. So he decides that if he uses a random sampling, the representation for each state may not come, and in this case, in the 4 states, some students may be more from a particular state. If there are some 1,000 students, maybe 400 may be coming from one state, then 200 from another state, then 300 from the other state, 100 from the other state, like that. It may not be proportional to. The numbers from each state may not be proportional, may not be equal. So we need to take that point also into consideration. So what we are doing is, we find that population not as homogeneous. So in order to make sure that every group should get that a chance for being included in the sample, the researcher finds that if you use the random sampling techniques, that proportional case may not come. So he decides to divide the group into different stratas. And in the example that I told you here, we divide the students from the states to which they belong. So we divide them here. In this case, in this particular school, there are students from 4 different states. So we divide the whole population into 4 strata. That means according to their native place, according to their native state, the population is divided into 4 smaller subgroups, and that is a strata that we have taken. And what we are doing is, after dividing, and if you want to take the sample from out of that, if you think we want to take 100 sample, there are 1000 students and we want to take 100 of them, and we had 4 stratas, we had 4 smaller subgroups in that, but we don't take 25 each, like we need 100 from a population of 1000, we need 100 students, and we have found 4 smaller strata in between them, among them. Then we don't take 25 each. For 25 each also we can make 100 sample, we'll get, but here we don't do that. That should be proportional. Sample size from each strata should be proportional to the population. For example, if there are 400 students from a first stage, then 200 from the other, and then 300 from the other, and 100 from the other. Means for the whole 10, it may be, the proportion may be 4:3:2:1. So the total it makes 10. So from the first group we select 40 of them. For the second group, from the second state, we select only 30. Then from the other state we take 20, and from the other state, the fourth state, we take only 10. That means the proportionally we should take, sample size from each strata should be proportional to the population. Here what the advantage is that it makes sure that every category had a representation. Nobody will be left out. If you use the random technique here, sometimes some students may not get or students from a particular native state may not get a representation. To make sure that it is everybody is represented, it is more suitable than the simple random sampling. But here the problem is that to divide the population, and the basis on which they need to be stratified, the basis on which the whole population need to be stratified, the whole population need to be divided into smaller subgroups, the basis that need to be taken care of. The researcher decides the basis. Actually, in the case I have told you here, the researcher finds that the native state of every student is important. But another researcher may think like that, may think in some other ways. He may think that the religion is important. He may take the religion as the basis. So, while selecting the basis of dividing into smaller groups, the researcher need to be very careful to make our research more validated. Only then we will get a good research result. So this is what we call as a stratified random sampling. And then we come to the cluster sampling. In cluster sampling, the population is divided into different groups or clusters. See, in the last time, what we are doing in stratified sampling is that the population is not homogeneous. But in cluster sampling, the population will be more or less homogeneous. So only when the population is homogeneous, the cluster sampling is recommended. Here what we are doing is, the population is divided into different groups or clusters. Then the required clusters are selected on a simple random or systematic sampling method. Here all the subjects from the selected cluster will be included in the sample. So every cluster will have, all the clusters will be homogeneous more or less. Only then we can use that. Here for an example, you want to study the parenting style patterns of standard 9 students of a particular school. population is 600 and want to select a sample of 50, and there are 12 divisions each comprising 50 students. Then you select a division on a random basis and conduct study in that particular division. So for that, the whole 600 should be more or less homogeneous. The researcher should have that knowledge that the whole population is homogeneous. Only then we can use that this type of sampling, that is a cluster sampling. We select a cluster and we do the research only on that particular cluster. We take the whole sample. That's the difference here. That's a way that differs from a stratified sampling technique. In stratified sampling technique, again from every group we select. Here we don't do that. We select a group, and the whole group, the members from the whole group will be selected as the sample. So that's the difference here. And now we'll move on to the non-probability sampling. In here, individuals are selected based on non-random criteria, and not every individual has a chance of being included and so has a higher risk of sampling bias. We had told you earlier that non-probability sampling is mostly used for qualitative research. The probability sampling is mostly used for quantitative research, whereas in non-probability test is mostly used for qualitative research, and here there is a higher risk of sampling bias. Let us see the types of non-probability sampling. One is convenience sampling, then purposive or judgmental sampling, quota sampling, consecutive sampling, snowball sampling. These are the sampling techniques. These are the mostly used non-probability sampling techniques, and we will see it one by one. What is convenience sampling? We could see when we read the word, the term itself, we will get a idea about what convenience sampling is. We select samples because they are conveniently available to the researcher, easy to recruit. The only criteria is whether the participants agree to participate. So convenience samples, as the word says, according to the convenience of the researcher. Whoever is willing, we just recruit them. So that's the whoever is available, and if they are willing, we'll include them into the sample. So that is convenience sampling. For example, you want to study the consumer behavior at a supermarket. You reach there and collect the required information from the consumers who are present there at that time, provided they are willing to participate. So the researcher goes there, and whoever he sees, he approaches them, and if they are willing, they will be selected. There is no random sampling and other thing, cluster and all that. Whoever is willing, we take. Here it has a disadvantage of sampling error and lack of representativeness, but it doesn't make sure that the sample is a true representation of the whole population. It does not assure the representative nature of the sample. We will see what purposive sampling is. In purposive sampling or judgmental sampling, we choose only those people who are deemed to be fit to participate in the research study. It is the discretion of the researcher. It may not be statistically representative. The researchers get a lot of information from the data, time and cost effective, but it is prone to researchers' bias. So in purposive sampling or judgmental sampling, whoever seems to be fit for the study will be taken as a sample, and it is all based on the judgment of the researcher. The researcher goes to a population and he thinks that yes, that sample is good, or some other persons are good for that, some other sample is good. That is the judgment of the researcher, and then he collect the data from those samples. He will avoid the other samples, and he will select only those samples whom the researcher finds that they are fit for the study. So it all depends on the discretion of the researcher. For example, if a researcher wants to study about the effective teaching methods to teach poetry, He may approach the teachers whom the researchers see as appropriate. He may not he may not select all the language teachers, and he may not doing the simple random techniques or something like that. He won't do all that. What he will do is he'll select some language teachers, he'll find some language teachers, and the researcher may find that some of them are fit to get studied. Then what the researcher will do, that the researcher will go to those samples and collect the data. So here the problem is that it may be dependent on the researcher's bias, and there may be a sampling bias also. But this is also one of the ways that we used for non-probability sampling methods, that is the purposive sampling. Then the next one is the quota sampling. Quota sampling, it is a non-probabilistic version of stratified sampling. Population is first segmented into mutually exclusive subgroups. Then judgment is used to select the subjects or units from each segment based on a specified proportion. It allows the researchers to sample a subgroup that is of great interest to the study, but only the selected traits of the population were taken into account in forming the subgroups. So here what we do is that the whole population will be divided into mutually exclusive subgroups. Then it allows the researchers to sample a subgroup that is of great interest to the study. Then here what we are doing is, as it is in the case of a stratified sampling technique, here also we divide them into subgroups, because it may be the whole group, the population may not be homogeneous. Here also we use this technique because it is not homogeneous, the population is not homogeneous. So what the researcher is doing is, the researcher will be making them into smaller groups, mutually exclusive subgroups. And here in the next step we don't use the random technique. According to the judgment of the researcher, we select the sample from that particular population. So here there is a non-random sample selection which differs it from stratified sampling. Here we will do the stratification, we divide them into strata, but after all in the second step we will be selecting the sample on a non-random basis. That means it depends on the discretion of the researcher. And then the next one is the consecutive sampling. Here every subject meeting the criteria of the inclusion is selected until the required sample size is achieved. Here whoever comes first, we approach them and we select them as our sample, and we keep on selecting the sample until we reach the required sample that we need. If a researcher is unable to obtain conclusive results with one sample, he can depend on the second sample and so on for drawing conclusive results. So if you want to select some 50 students like that, then what you do is, whoever comes the first will do that consecutive sampling. In that we will take the first 50 and then we will see, and if the researcher finds that no, this result is not good, then he can go for another 50. So here what we are doing is, every subject meeting the criteria of inclusion is selected until the required sample size is achieved. And then the next one is the snowball sampling. It is mostly used if the researcher finds it difficult to get the sample. In some cases the researchers may be difficult to get the required sample. At that time we can use this snowball sampling. It helps researchers to find a sample when they are difficult to locate. Once the researchers find suitable subjects, he asks them for assistance to seek similar subjects to form a considerably good sized sample. So here an example. If you want to study about the living conditions of homeless people in a certain town, and the researcher finds it difficult to find the sample, he finds one sample and asks him to refer another person. This process continues till he reaches the required sample size. So this is used, I had told you, this is used when the researcher finds to locate the required sample. Here in this case, the homeless people, he want to take the homeless people as a sample. So he find it difficult to find the homeless sample in a particular town. So what he do is he somehow he gets one sample and he approached him and he asked to get the reference for others. That means the people who are homeless, and this process continues until he reaches the required sample size. So we'll see the difference once again between the probability sampling and the non-probability sampling. We'll see what are the characteristics of the probability sampling. In probability sampling, the sample is selected at random. So the term random is very important for probability sampling. And the other one, everyone in the population, every subject in the population has an equal chance of getting selected, and it is used to reduce the sampling bias, and we'll get the more accurate sample. The sample will be more accurate. So this is the characteristics of the probability sampling. Whereas in non-probability sampling, selection based on the subjective judgment of the researcher. When you think about the whole non-probability testing methods, that is a convenience sampling and quota sampling and all that, in every selection, in all those sampling techniques, the judgment of the researchers is an important factor. So the selection is based on the subjective judgment of the researcher. So not everyone will get an equal chance to participate because it is mostly decided by the judgment of the researcher, and does not consider sampling bias. The sampling bias may come, but the researcher will not take into consideration. And also the sample does not accurately represent the population. So these are the characteristics of both the probability sampling and the non-probability sampling. And when we are doing a research, choosing a right sampling technique is a crucial element to validate the research. Only then our result will be more accurate. So this is a very important step, that is selecting the sample from the population on which we are doing the research, because the samples should be representative of the population. That's the point that we need to take care of. The sample should always be a representation of the population. So subscribe the channel to watch the full series, and also you can visit sciclinic.co.in for more details and resources. So thank you for watching.